Hello and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for hopping on today. This is the sixth webinar of this year. It's a timely one. I seem to be getting a lot of questions recently in terms of, what systems integrate with what payroll and how we can streamline business owners' processes and HR nightmares for deductions and payroll issues. So we've internally gone through a little bit of that process ourselves with payroll, so it's been timely that we have who we have on the call today. I'm going to go through some house cleaning items, and then, like usual, I'm going to hand it over to my guest. He's got a lot of great content to share, so I don't want to hog the stage too much. Uh, Looks like we have some new attendees I don't recognize on the call. So for anyone that I do not have the pleasure of knowing yet, my name's Thomas Purcell. I'm the director of the Employee Benefits Division here at URL Insurance. We're a wholesale brokerage. We help with Medicare offerings. We have a life markets division, fixed annuities, and then our health plan options division that helps with employee benefits and individual health under 65. So today, I like to have a lot of different content that we put out this year. We've had some CE courses. This one is going to be on the importance of integrating business ops. So this talks a little bit about benefit administration systems. I see some of you are current clients on the call today, so you're familiar with that software we offer. But today I have Artie on the call from ProLiant, a payroll company we partner with. So right-hand side of your screen is going to be the chat and Q&A feature. We also have a handout tab that you can click on. Within that handout tab, there's some stuff that Artie wanted to share with you in regards to his presentation. There's also a link to our website where you'll have access to all of URL's webinars and content we put out, not just mine. So if you're looking for one of our Medicare webinars that Christy Wilbert puts on, that's where you can access those as well. So please check that out. It's where you can also sign up for future webinars. Our next webinar is Tuesday, June 6th. We keep it on the Tuesday theme. My guest is going to be Principal, and they're going to be talking about FMLA, what it is and how it works. Very exciting topic. So please, if you haven't registered for that one, register. All of these webinars are available on recording afterwards. If you have any questions, type it in the chat, type it in the Q&A as we go along. If we have time at the end, I'm going to be happy to address all of your questions. If we don't have time, I'll be following up with you. Okay, that was a lot. I think I got through it all. Without further ado, I want to hand this over to Artie. He's been great so far. Artie, please take it away, my man.
Appreciate it, Tom. Thank you for the introduction. Hello, everyone. Just like to introduce myself quickly. I am the enterprise sales manager for a national payroll provider called ProLiant. We've been around for about 30 years, but this presentation right here is going to be something a little bit more generalized, not necessarily looking at the payroll world whatsoever, but more so integrations and their importance in certain business operations. I'll familiarize you all with some terminology that's oftentimes a little bit technical, and some folks don't know exactly what it means, but it's going to be a lot of great content from a learning perspective to understand some of these terms, understand what to look for when looking at integrations. And I'll give you a few examples towards the end of how some of these integrations function and what are some of the key differences. So without further ado, I'll jump in, but I do like to make these interactive. If you do have any questions, I am peeking at the chat, so feel free at any point in time to bombard me with those. I'd love to answer those along the way, but we'll always I like to leave at least 10 minutes or so to answer any remaining questions towards the end of the call as well. Some of the items that we'll be focusing on today are the two main integrations that are available in the marketplace today. Mainly API integrations and SFTP integrations, and what are the biggest differences between the two, or what are some of the instances where one is applicable and the other is not, and vice versa. We'll discuss 180 and 360 integrations, which I'm sure some of you on the call are familiar with that terminology, as that is pretty commonplace in the market today with retirement plans, connectivity to benefit administration systems, and so on. And then we'll also cover standardized integrations versus custom build. What are the differences? What are the economic impacts of each option? And how to recognize either option before you make the leap of faith into employing one of them at your organization. Finally, we'll discuss the administrative and reconciliation and also the employee benefits of integrations and what they can do in your workplace. And I'll give you a specific example of one that we have with Burn a Portal. And ultimately, at the end, again, I'll leave some time for questions, but feel free to use the chat if there's anything that is current that you want to get off the top of your head and just ask away. So being in sales, I hear these terms thrown around pretty often. And oftentimes, when I was first getting into sales about 7 years ago, I wasn't necessarily sure what it all meant. But an API is typically the most common terminology that's being thrown around. A lot of conferences, a lot of different meeting rooms by brokers, payroll companies, 401k companies. And all it means is that there is an application program interface between two softwares. So typically the interface, I treat it as a handshake, but it literally means that there is a contract between two systems that identifies what data that they're sending to each other through requests and responses. The interface itself can be custom built to every specific client. Typically, there's already a framework of what data is accessible through an API integration with one system and the other. Some are a little bit more conservative in terms of the data that they put out into the open marketplace for other systems to access, whereas others have a pretty open architecture framework and they give access to literally any data field that another system wants to pull as long as the client authorizes it. One of the most important things about API integration specifically is that they're monitored for performance and scalability. So for example, if a client really needs real-time data reporting, they can set that frequency of the API to reoccur every 5 seconds, every 30 seconds, or every minute. That way, both systems are being synchronized basically in real time. Whereas other clients, let's say they're just looking for a time and labor integration for payroll processing purposes, right? That might be occurring every weekly or on a weekly basis or bi-weekly frequency. So it's not as often. Above all else, though, APIs offer pretty strong security as they never really fully expose the full data set to the other system or all of the data repository that resides in the other system. Typically, an API connection will request each data point individually, and that other software will provide it in batches. So, if you request a large subset of data in almost like a file format, it will actually send little pieces of that file over to the other system. That way, if anyone ever, let's say, infiltrates the network or the network is compromised, there's not enough sustained data being in transit for anyone to really do anything with. That's the security piece of it. So moving along, how that differentiates from an SFTP integration is there are kind of a few different main caveats of how an API and SFTP configuration differ. An SFTP configuration is really just a file transfer, except it's using encryption. That's the secure abbreviation for it. You'll also hear this referred to as an FTP, just file transfer protocol as well. That's not using data encryption. But overall, it's really intended for accessing, transferring, and managing large files of data. So if you have an import for time and labor, if you want to import a lot of employee demographics that are onboarded in a different system than your main, let's say, HR software, most likely they're going to use an SFTP for that, since it's only occurring, occasionally, not in real time. But really, it helps also organizations meet regulatory compliance from a data management perspective. Since this file is encrypted when it is sent out and then decrypted and rebuilt in the destination, it abides by certain regulatory laws like HIPAA and other compliance related laws as well. So typically this file supports, large files being transferred or transferring multiple files simultaneously. But in an SFTP configuration, there's usually a middleman that's doing the handshake between both systems. That middleman is typically a server that is set up by an IT team, but that is really what is housing the data during its path in transit, and also encrypting it and decrypting it on the back end. In addition to this, as you all probably are aware, a lot of different softwares are written in different code languages. So a big portion of the SFTP process is to ensure that whatever file is produced from one software is readable by the other software. So typically with an SFTP protocol, there are file formatting requirements. It has to be in a very specific format from a readability perspective for the other file or the other system, to accept. This method is typically mainly used for the occasional data transfer. It's not intended for someone looking to get real-time instantaneous data from one system to the other. And I'll describe why that is in the next slide. So what are some of the biggest pros and cons of each method? I'll start with the API integration or the application programming interface. So the pros are, this is a real-time data exchange. The frequency can be determined by the client. It can be updated to occur more frequently in real time or less frequently, depending on the needs and necessities of the client as well. There's also really kind of an ease of integration here. Usually, if there is an API available from another system, it is well documented. There's typically something called essentially a Swagger site, or you can think of it as an API handbook, where there are certain commands and functions that are described by the system provider and how to access certain data sets through the use of scripting or commands and coding. So with that, usually anyone with IT expertise can be able to read that handbook and have a good understanding of what the data is that's available to them and how to access it if they were to go down the route of building that connection. And with that, because of that handbook, there's a lot of customization capabilities, right? You don't have to take that full data from one system to the other. You can kind of pick and choose from an a la carte menu standpoint. And it can also reflect updates. So since you're not just occasionally transferring a file, right? If you make updates to one system, it will typically reflect that update in the other system momentarily, within 5 seconds, within 20 seconds, and so on, depending on how often you have that frequency synchronizing both systems. Now, some of the cons here is that it just requires technical expertise to develop and maintain. Typically, most providers in the market will have an open API handbook that's publicly available to read through on their website, but what they won't do is actually build the API connection for you. Typically, that will occur by the client themselves or a third party that has experience in both systems and has built these types of integrations in the past. The only time, you won't require technical expertise to develop and maintain a certain API, if it's something that's corporate sponsored. So something that's already established, there's a large volume of clients already using it. That's typically something you'll see with, Bernie Portal that we'll cover here, but a lot of different softwares will have integration partners on their website. So that you can think of as something that's already corporate sponsored and built out for the use of their clients. There is some limitation here that it's not compatible with all systems. Again, there are a lot of systems that are written in completely different code languages. Some of them may be outdated, so they don't have API capabilities, or they can't necessarily transcribe the language that their system is in to a readable format that the other system is in. So those are some of the limitations. Only, I would say, if you're on newer gen softwares, a lot of them offer webhooks or API connectivity for folks to interact two systems together. But that's just something to keep in the back of your mind as you're looking to connect different systems in the future. And then lastly, they're expensive to build from scratch. If it's something that's not a corporate sponsored API connection, it's something that the client would have to pay out of pocket for typically to build from scratch, unless there's maybe someone that's giving you credits to do it. And typically, these implementations, depending on the scope and build of the project, can take anywhere from 6 weeks all the way out to 16 to 20 weeks, depending on the complexity of the integration itself. Now, an SFTP is really, the pros of that one are that it's very secure. Again, the data is encrypted every time that it's sent, and it's sent in batches. So you can think of it basically, if you have a full Excel file, it will send certain columns of that Excel one batch at a time in an encrypted format. And then once it reaches that destination, it's decrypted. And then that file is rebuilt by the server and then finally put into the other residing platform. There is some manual intervention that's required there. Someone has to go in and actually grab the file from the server and then download it into the system. But since it's already in the format and it's readable by that technology, it's typically just literally a file dump, and then you have all of that data in your software. The other benefit here is that a lot of systems in this day and age are compatible for an SFTP transfer file. The reason is because most systems now can produce Excel format, and most of these files are going to be some sort of formatting in Excel, or the other popular one is CSV. So some of the cons with a secure file transfer protocol is that it's, in the name, it's mainly used to just transfer files. It's not going to capture real-time updates that you're making in one system and simultaneously updating the other system. That's more of an API to differentiate those two. And then there's also time delays that can occur. Obviously, because of the encryption process and the rebuilding of the file, since it's sent in batches, there is time delay with these things. So it's usually not long, but sometimes if it's a very large file that is sent in batches, it could take up to 30 minutes to 40 minutes for that file to send through to the other system. And then there is a little bit of complexity in setting these things up, because it does require a server to do the handshake essentially between these two systems. I would say that is really where the only technical expertise is required between the two systems to set up an SFTP integration. Everything else is really a data formatting complexity. It's formatting the file into a readable format that the other system can accept. And, most administrators are very proficient in Excel, more so than I am. So I'm sure you guys can figure out the formatting of it and if it's capable of doing that. So transitioning a little bit here, but there are two types of integrations that are typically available in the market that denote what kind of API integration it is or what kind of SFTP integration it is. Typically, 180 and 360 integrations can be used for either SFTPs or APIs. It doesn't really matter. Most APIs, I will tell you, are 360 though. There's not many people that want to build out an API and do all that work just to have one software sending that data one way. But the main differentiators are that 180 integrations are one way only. It's one system sending data to the other and not vice versa, while 360 integrations are bidirectional. So they're sharing that data and updating. You can have an update to an employee demographic field occur in the benefits platform and it will reflect in the payroll vendor, or vice versa. You can update it in the payroll system and it will reflect in the benefits administration software. So there's usually less duplicate entry involved in 360 integrations. And it's also with 180 integrations, the one caveat to always keep in the back of your mind is that there is usually some mirroring occurring that has to, where manual intervention is required, where you'll have to mirror a change that occurs in one system and populate it in the other, because there's not that feedback loop essentially where it's bidirectional. Now, I think the most interesting portion of this is really identifying which integrations are standard built and which ones would be custom built. Typically, the biggest identifier of this is on a company's website. They'll typically have a marketplace tab where you can filter by integration partners. And if someone is listed, that typically denotes that they have, an API connection built out with that vendor. And with standardized corporate sponsored integration plans, there is typically no integration fee. The one area where you would experience an integration fee that would be reoccurring is if it's a very brand new integration. Typically, when two softwares integrate together and it's relatively new to the market, there's development costs on both ends. So sometimes if there's a development cost or an integration cost that one benefit platforms bills the payroll vendor for, the payroll vendor will have to pass through that cost onto the clients using that integration until that cost is alleviated. So that's really the only time we see these reoccurring integration fees being invoiced is for relatively new integrations that are available in the marketplace. If it's something that's long-standing, meaning been around for 2+ years, typically these integrations should carry no charge. If you do see that you're being built for an API connection, it's usually going to be something that's being passed through onto the vendor from the other system. Now, these standardized integrations don't require IT expertise. The integration's typically already built out, and working with both of your vendors, you'll just typically select the subset of data that you're looking to transfer. They'll basically present an a la carte menu of what the integration can do from a data transfer standpoint, and you can just pick and choose what data you want to be sent over or transcribed between both softwares. The only requirement from an IT perspective is typically there's an API token. You can think of that as like a set of keys for your house. Typically, that is set up or established between both systems to ensure that every time one software sends data to the other software, it's authenticating the transaction that you do have the keys to that software. So that's the one area where IT expertise may be needed. Again, the standardized integrations or API connections are usually fully tested. There's a large volume of clients on these, and they're available for reference calls, most likely to talk about the integration. And I already covered, it's advertised as an integration partner, but typically these integrations are also maintained by the service providers themselves. So the vendor will actually take it upon themselves to maintain and ensure that that integration still functions through iterations or updates of both technologies. So really the best, option when looking at the market is to look at a standardized integration, look for options that are already readily available and tested. When you're going to a custom built one, sometimes you find yourself as the guinea pig in some of these transactions where, there are still kinks and issues that both service vendors will have to work out. But anyways, on that note, the custom built integration can typically last anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks. We work with many different partners that actually do build out custom integrations to various softwares because we don't offer a corporate sponsored one just yet. So there are a lot of vendors in the market available that are building out integrations on a client's behalf from a third-party perspective. Now, this carries a reoccurring integration fee. It's usually like a maintenance fee where that third party will keep up that integration and maintain it to ensure that even if your payroll system or your time and labor system, whatever systems you're integrating, as they're going through iterations of updates, that the data that's being sent between this integration is still in a readable format for the other software to accept. Now, these custom built integrations are not advertised, so I would always look to ask if you're wondering or curious about integrating two systems that you don't see online. It's always important to ask if the vendor that you're working with has the capabilities to build this integration from their side, or if it requires your IT team and their involvement to help set that up. Now, there's also a limited volume of clients on a similar integration with a custom built one. Typically, when there's a third party involved that's building on the integration, what you're looking for is that they have experience working in both systems that you're trying to integrate, and most likely if they're at the table, they do. But that is one thing I would, definitely look out for as a requirement when you're speaking to a third party and having them manage the project from a build and configuration standpoint. Now, I know we talked about a lot of the different terminology and the technical terms of these integrations and what they all mean. I think the most important piece is what does it do for your business, or what's in it for me as the administrator managing some of these processes? So there's a lot of SHRM studies out there. Even Ernst & Young estimates that per 100 changes, there's about a 7% error rate that occurs in making some of these changes or hand keying data into different systems as part of a duplicate entry process. So eliminating that will reduce time fixing errors in the near future. In addition to that, there's usually economics involved or an economic impact. If you ever go through an audit and there's, data that's not reconciled correctly or there's mismatched data, it can potentially result in fines if it's something from a compliance and regulatory standpoint. Now, from a reporting standpoint, this increases visibility into the organization, true labor costs, and gives you data that can be used to manage your workforce in a proactive fashion by making, agile decisions rather than reactive decisions because that data is maybe delayed. Another aspect of this is for your people. Typically, there'll be one centralized or maybe a few systems that they're using in their day-to-day operations. And if there is, everything outside of the workplace nowadays is basically going on through this device right here. I'm trying to hold up my smartphone, but you can't really see it there. But it's all consolidated in real life. And sometimes when we go into the workplace, we're being asked to manage 3, 4, 5, 6 different systems with different passwords with no single sign-on. And it can be complicated for an employee. So the benefit for them is that if there is integrated software throughout the workplace, typically they'll have visibility into their real, true data at any point in time, 24/7. And that's important from an employer's perspective because, it's still an employee's market right now. I would say, I think the market is tightening, but there's still a lot of job openings out there and people not filling them. So employers are being choosy. It's important to reflect, accurate benefit coverages, accurate salaries, accurate time and labor data for an employee because that impacts their pay. And ultimately, that is what they're looking at when they're often making a decision to change over to another organization. Manual intervention is a big topic here. Reducing time having to maintain duplicate entry is always a big win for everyone involved. It just removes, routine time that you take every week to synchronize both systems. And ultimately, this is more so now talking on the point of benefits administration integration specific to a payroll vendor. It can streamline your benefits reconciliation process because these two systems will reconcile your premiums and a lot of the things that go into benefits administration and the overpayment of insurance plans on a real-time basis. So you can get analysis and see what plans are, out of order, for example, if there's someone still on coverage that shouldn't be, that was terminated, right? It eliminates those arenas or the risk of instances occurring where you forgot to maybe offboard someone and now you're paying still for their premiums on their insurance. So those are some of the big focal points. If you're growing in headcount and you're starting to manage a lot of employees with a pretty lean HR department, things sometimes fall through the cracks and those can result in overpayment. Lastly, for ACA compliance, this is a big one for anyone over 50 full-time equivalents, but having end-to-end visibility just in the full-time and part-time equivalency, and also affordability percentages by integrating your benefit coverages, your premiums in there, and having that full visibility of their salary, how many hours they work, and what their actual rates are for their coverages. You'll be able to see if your plans are affordable or if they're kind of above that threshold of about 9.6%. And then lastly, the biggest goal here with a lot of integrations is to just reallocate time towards more strategic initiatives, whether it's hiring at career fairs or creating learning and development within the organization. There are bigger fish to fry, essentially, for any HR department rather than re-entering data on a daily basis. So a lot of these integrations look to make the lives of the administrators easier while also ensuring that all the data is synchronized between those systems from a compliance perspective. Now, lastly, we'll just focus a little bit about one of our integrations with a benefit system. So we actually process the payroll for Bernard's Health. So we have had a little bit more access to Bernie Portal than most other vendors out there. Typically, Burning Portal is very restrictive on who they give access to their data to. So having a 360 integration sets us apart quite a bit from the market, as usually we see it as a 180. But typically for an employer on Burning Portal that's using that software, if they were to use ProLine, for example, any new employees that onboard through the Burning Portal software will be auto-created in ProLine. So it gets rid of the manual entry or duplicate entry involved with having to rekey that new hire into the payroll engine. In addition to that, employee demographic changes will be passed from Burning Portal to ProLine. So any changes made to their record, any changes made to their demographics, their actual benefit deductions, they'll pass over to ProLine. So that can be their name, social security, withholding, and etc. There's more information on the handout that's attached to this meeting that you can refer to that summarizes some of these data sets at more length than I'm going to do here. But it's all the information that you typically expect for the integration to pass through from a demographic standpoint. In addition, there can be more fields that are populated, there are some fields that are required to be populated by the client in ProLine that do not exist in Burning Portal. Typically, there's things like cost centers, assigned managers, non-medical deductions that simply just won't exist in the Burning Portal platform that you might have to go in and actually hand key into ProLine when you're onboarding and finalizing that employee record. So all of these integrations are a little bit different. The ones we have with other benefit administration softwares, as you can see, like some of the data, there's minute differences in what populates, what doesn't, what requires some rekeying, and so on. But Burning Portal specifically for the 360 side, all the deductions are going to flow over and be passed to ProLine from Burning Portal. Any qualifying life events that are recorded in that system as well will automatically populate and update that record. You can even do things such as like effective dating if you want to put that down, and that way, a certain rate will continue to a certain end date, and then the new rate will start on the effective date if there's those specific instances with an insurance plan. And then lastly, there's certain information that can also flow back from ProLine into Burning Portal, such as updates. And some of the ones I listed here are just like city, state, zip code, and personal email that the employee has, as well as some other fields that are part of their employee record. So typically with the Burning Portal integration, we like to treat the actual system of record, or where you're making all the changes and updates to the employee's profile. We recommend you typically make those in Burning Portal, as more of the information sends back into ProLine and there's less duplicate entry involved. But there's also a good subset of data that flows over from ProLine into Burning Portal. And over the years, Burning Portal has given us more and more access to change and adjust certain fields within their system. So, this changes on almost a month-to-month basis, where we incorporate more fields that flow from ProLine into Burning Portal. So ultimately, we want to give our clients the choice in terms of which system they utilize for their system of record. And as I'm rounding out, I just want to say, thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure speaking to you all. If you have any questions whatsoever, feel free to put them in the chat. I've been keeping an eye on it and I don't see anything yet. Or if you don't want to put anything in the chat, just feel free to shoot me a note. I have my contact information here and would be more than happy to answer anything following this call.
Thanks, Artie. That was fantastic. That first slide, dissecting API feeds was helpful even for me. I didn't realize the advanced security measures was rather interesting, and a point I didn't take into consideration. I think another real great takeaway is that 180 versus 360. I think it's a lot of clients I meet with, everyone's good at asking, hey, does this integrate with this? And that's a yes or no answer. It's important to follow that up with, how does that integrate? Is it 180? Is it 360? And then what does that mean for your your organization internally and what that process looks like? So that's super helpful. I did have one question come through on the private chat. I think they're asking about EDI feeds.
Mhm.
Would that be more? I'm guessing that would be more considered API. What would you take into? How does EDI feeds translate to API?
So an EDI feed is actually, I wouldn't consider it an API. It's more of a file transfer protocol. Basically, it's taking at the end of each payroll transaction, or any changes to your benefit elections from an employee perspective, those will get sent out to the carriers. Typically, where these integrations are built out, if you're thinking from like the full ecosystem perspective, is on the benefit administration side. So it depends on kind of the setup of the client. Are they using a payroll system where benefits is built by the payroll provider and it's basically managed by the payroll vendor? So it's an all-inclusive kind of HR toolbox, or is it something where those two systems are separate, right? But typically what will occur is those feeds will be built by the benefits platform, and they'll connect to the carrier. They'll basically be a file transfer that occurs on a certain frequency. And the reason it's not an API is because, again, it's not, the carrier technically doesn't communicate information back into the benefits platform, right? The benefits platform is what is housing the election data. It's housing any qualifying events, any changes to plans. And all the carrier cares about is seeing those rates and those plans reflected on their end so they can update, the premiums or what they're billing on their side. So that's typically the setup there. The one thing I will just mention on EDI feeds, most insurance carriers actually have a minimum headcount threshold in order to build out an EDI feed. So most vendors, I would say 99% of the vendors in the market will happily build an EDI feed to a benefit carrier. The only caveat to that is that for a carrier to accept an EDI feed, they typically have a minimum of 100 lives threshold. So they'll have a minimum of 100 lives on a plan before they opt to accept that EDI feed, because there is a cost for them to also kind of build that file as well.
Yeah, that's a super great explanation there. And valid in central Pennsylvania, our local blues carriers, they have 100 life requirements for minimum for EDI feeds. But the good news on that front is if you partner with an organization like URL, if we're the administrator of that benefit admin system or partnering with the payroll and the benefit admin piece, we can oftentimes handle that processing on the back end. So still on the front end, in terms of the HR process, it could be 180, it could be 360 integration, but partnering with a brokerage like URL, you wouldn't be handling that new employee or that terminated employee in the insurance carrier portal. We would handle that for you if there wasn't capabilities to set up that EDI feed. Hopefully that explains it okay. But that was a good explanation, Artie. Okay, cool. I don't see anything else. I do want to be respectful of everyone's time. So Artie, thank you again. You were fantastic. Everyone on the call today, thank you for hopping on. I'll follow up with each of you individually. And I look forward to seeing you in June for the FMLA presentation with Principal. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, everyone.